Next up, while his supporters target the electoral system in his name, Donald Trump is going after big tech and social media in theirs. The former president just filed class action lawsuits against Facebook, Google, and Twitter, claiming the sites discriminate against conservatives.
We're demanding an end to the shadow banning, a stop to the silencing, and a stop to the blacklisting, banishing, and canceling that you know so well. Our case will prove this censorship is unlawful, it's unconstitutional, and it's completely un-American.
Though Trump and some of his supporters have been banned or suspended for violating the terms of sites like Facebook and Twitter, several studies, including a recent one from NYU, have found that not only is the claim that social media companies censor conservatives unfounded, but right-leaning sites like Fox News and Breitbart consistently outperform mainstream news outlets on Facebook. So does this suit or these suits actually stand a chance? And how much work do Google, Facebook, and Twitter still have to do when it comes to effectively regulating dangerous speech? I'm joined now by Joan Donovan, the research director of Harvard's Shorenstein Center on Media Politics and Public Policy, and the head of the group's Technology and Social Change Project, and by Joanna Weiss, the editor-in-chief of Northeastern University's Experience magazine. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Joanna, let me start with you. As you see it, is this serious litigation from the president or a political stunt?
You know, every comment I've read by anyone who's a constitutional lawyer says no. It says that that there is such a thing as the First Amendment, and the First Amendment applies to government control of speech. These are private companies, and anytime you sign up for a social media platform, you have to check off that very, very long list of terms of service that nobody reads, but that grant these companies the right to moderate the content on their websites as they see fit. So there is just no legal case that this lawsuit serves. However, it is an amazing public relations strategy, because once Donald Trump got off Twitter, he was largely silenced. That was the method he used to bypass the press. Now he has to go through the press, and when you file a lawsuit, lo and behold, the press pays attention to you.
Very crafty, and he's extremely good at that. Joan, President Trump, former President Trump, clearly loves to play the victim card. He talked all the time during his presidency, after his presidency, about how horribly he's been treated, how no one in the history of the entire world ever has been or ever will be treated as badly as he was, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, do you think there is any merit, or even the kernel of some merit, to his critique here?
I mean, substantively, as a scholar of the internet, nobody wants these companies to have this much control. I mean, nobody wants them to have such consolidated power where, let's take, for instance, that maybe they weren't benevolent, right? Maybe they were the CEO of other, what we would call fringe platforms, who both allow everything and anything to go through and also promote hate speech, white supremacist content. Right? And so there is a very sincere problem that lie at the heart of the issue, which is that these companies scaled very quickly, they have enormous power, and they do control, by and large, the flow of information. And what's astounding is essentially that someone with so much power, like the former president, that these companies would have to, because of the way in which the Capitol insurrection played out, that they would actually have to shut off his accounts. And so, no, the president is not being victimized, but at the same time, we do have a problem with our social media, especially in terms of the way in which they control much of what circulates online.
As someone who studies this stuff very closely, to your mind, do any of the big tech companies distinguish themselves by doing a relatively enlightened job of moderating content, exercising a restraint while also weeding out dangerous speech, or are they all equally bad? And I ask that from not a position of knowledge, but I'm just routinely amazed at. I felt like Twitter last fall was making up as they went along. I still marvel at Mark Zuckerberg saying a couple years back that he didn't think Holocaust deniers were wrong about the Holocaust on purpose. So right now, are any of them doing a good job when it comes to this stuff?
Well, some of the minor platforms, let's say, for instance, you don't see as much of this stuff on Twitch or Pinterest, for instance, because they think about who their user base is and then they craft their products. If you're a gamer and you're on Twitch, there's a certain set of rules, and you know what's to one side and what's to the other. Of course, there are edge cases. Pinterest made a very clear line about vaccine information. Even information about vaccines, you don't get a search return if you type in the word vaccine, because they had been targeted early on by anti-vaccination activists even before COVID.
Yeah.
And so it is possible. Reddit as well has put together a bunch of different community moderation systems. But the problem is none of those systems scale. And Facebook, Twitter, and especially YouTube are obsessed with scale. And as a result, many things fall through the cracks. And it takes sometimes researchers, journalists, advocates, every one of us, ringing the alarm bell, trying to get something to happen. And in some cases, nothing does. And that really was what happened with the case of the Capitol insurrection. We were all saying there's blatant calls to violence across these platforms. Even Parler tried to notify the government that they were seeing violent calls to action. But there's something going on where we don't actually take seriously things that are said online. It's seen as an inferior form of speech, low culture maybe, but I think now's the time.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over. I was going to say, as opposed to a genuine indicator of what people in fact are thinking and planning to do.
Yeah.
Sorry again for interrupting. Let me go to Joanne and then come back to you. I want to hear from both of you on this. The ad or the video that accompanied the president's lawsuit announcement. Let's take a look at it. I want you to size it up, Joanna, and then you, Joan.
We are at a crossroads in this nation. Either we accept our new fate, in which the First Amendment has to now be amended, or we stand firm. Big media, big government, and big tech are all trying to take away our freedoms. Our Constitution is timeless, and it needs to be defended, and now it will be. It's time to put America first once again.
Joanna Weiss, what strikes you about that spot?
Well, to go back to something that Joan said earlier, it is a bipartisan issue that there is concern about the power that these tech companies have and the power of the decision-making power that rests with such a small number of people. However, this has also been exploited very much as a partisan issue. And in addition to being able to get attention for this lawsuit, Donald Trump is using this as a fundraising opportunity. I mean, the fundraising calls went immediately out as soon as the press conference was over, or probably right before. And it's a very robust way to tap into a GOP base that has been very much aggrieved and has been, and if you look at any right-wing media, it's full of concerns about cancel culture, which again has a very broad definition, but has been interpreted as people from the left controlling the media, trying to silence right-wing thought of any kind. And so you're tapping it, that video taps into a feeling that's out there that people's speech on every level is being suppressed if they don't agree with an orthodoxy that's controlled by the left. That's the narrative that this feeds into.
Joan Donovan, do you make anything additional of that video, or is it pretty straightforward? Let's take a genuine issue of bipartisan concern and turn it into a narrow-bore partisan call to action?
Yeah, I mean, it's a call to action. It's certainly a fundraising campaign, and it's typical of conservatives of this day to be able to say that, somehow these social media companies are taking action on them, but they're not actually talking about the content and the substance. One of the things that becomes concerning about us getting wrapped up in this conversation is we also have to keep in mind that President Trump tried to overthrow the election using social media to bypass press and other kind of legitimate forms of criticism and gatekeeping that we've come to know and respect from our institutions. And by ignoring that, what about the millions and 70 some odd million people that he was trying to take the election away from, right? And what they're really, at this stage, most concerned with, not just cancel culture or critical race theory, but the rise of a multiracial democracy. I mean, the U.S. is changing demographically. It's changing in terms of its a set of core values. And the way in which free speech is used here as a cudgel, if we were making this argument and looking at it in a different country's context, we'd be saying, well, that president in that other country tried to overthrow an election by calling for a very wild protest on social media. And then as people were storming the Capitol during the election certification and beating to death officers, that that would be called oppression, right? And so this campaign and this stunt of a lawsuit against the social media companies, I think, is indicative of a long-term strategy that we're going to see, where one of the main outcomes of this is we're actually going to look very closely at how do these tech companies adapt? How do they answer? Do they, in fact, Facebook may, in fact, reinstate President Trump? They still haven't really definitively said that they weren't going to. And so it might have other kinds of effects in the long run.
We have to leave.
One
It.
thing
Oh,
I'd
go
also
ahead,
love to
Joanna.
say-
You've got just a tiny bit of
I
time.
just wanted to say about close reading that video is that it's really interesting the way it tries to co-opt patriotism for that purpose. I mean, all of that waving flag imagery and the Constitution could be taken away for us, that it's co-opting the whole idea of patriotism for this very partisan purpose, and that's again part of the very clever messaging that's behind this strategy, well beyond the actual substance of the lawsuit.
Down to the chance of USA as the spot closes. Joanna Weiss, Joan Donovan, thank you both for being here to talk about this.
Thank you.